we talk about this a lot, is just serving out of the overflow, of our own relationships with Jesus, because you can get burned out. There's always a need. And often when we're trying to close at night, someone is coming asking for something. And so it is hard balancing between the needs in the city and then also having rest, and time for our families and all those kinds of things.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Sowers Podcast. My name is Matt Naismith, and I am your host. This podcast features stories of Canadian church planters and leaders who are influencing kingdom movement and impacting their communities. Whether you're a church planter, pastor in a church, part of a church planting team, or someone just wanting to learn more, we pray you get inspired to become a sower in the places where you live, work, learn, and play. We pray this is a blessing to you, and if it is, we would ask you to share links to episodes, subscribe on whatever platform you are using. With that, let's get to our next conversation. Welcome, friends, to the Sowers Podcast. Thanks for joining us for another conversation that will hopefully inspire you to become a sower in the places where you live, work, learn, and play. If you are enjoying this podcast, if you've been challenged or inspired by it, I want to invite you to engage with us. And you can do that through emailing ask@thesowerspod.ca or through finding us on Instagram @thesowerspod. If you have suggestions for future guests, I would also love to hear from you. And once again, you can engage through email, ask@thesowerspod, or through Instagram direct message @thesowerspod. Well, in the next couple of episodes, we are going to be doing a little bit of a mini series in which I feature conversations that I have with people that are doing ministry to those on the margins. In this conversation that you are going to hear today, you're going to hear from Kim McGibbon, who is the director of the Send Relief Ministry Center in Hamilton, Ontario. Kim shares about her journey of coming into this role, what they're doing in Hamilton, the challenges that they are facing, but also the way in which they're coming alongside newcomers to the country, and in particular, refugees. Next week, you're going to hear from someone that is doing ministry amongst First Nations peoples in Canada. And so once again, this will be part one of a two-part mini series here on this podcast featuring stories of people doing ministry with those who are on the margins. Well, with that, friends, and without further ado, here is my conversation with Kim McGibbon of the Send Relief Ministry Center. Well, Kim, an official welcome to the Sowers Podcast. I'm grateful to be in this conversation with you today. So thanks for taking the time to be with us.
Thanks. Thanks for the privilege to come and chat with you about what I get to do every day.
We're going to get right into what you are up to each and every single day, but let's start with a little bit of your own personal history and background. Some of our listeners who are consistently listening, they would have heard Jason's story a number of weeks back, but why don't you jump into your own personal history and background and how Jason is connected to you?
Yeah. So Jason is connected to me because he's my husband. And so I have been a church planter's wife for the past 20 some odd years. And so I'm also a mom of 4 adult children that got to grow up church planting with us. And yeah, we moved to Hamilton about 12 years ago, I guess now. And this is the first urban city that I've lived in. So, grew up in suburbs, and to move to Hamilton was a big shift for us. And it's been really fun.
What were some of the immediate things that caught your attention, and what were some of the big elements to that shift?
I mean, I think the biggest thing was the amount of people that are here, but then also too, the lostness and also the brokenness that is in the city was a lot more apparent than it sometimes is in the suburbs. And so, I mean, one of the things is that my kids, when they first got here, they were fairly young, and they said, yeah, like the difference between where we had come from, the suburb we had come from, and Hamilton is that when people are talking to themselves in our old town, they had like a Bluetooth on, and sometimes people are talking to themselves here, and they're talking to somebody else that I don't know who's there. And so that was their first, and really our first encounter with mental health issues that were really apparent and, right on the street every day when you walked around.
And so, how was that as you were parenting? I think that there is this element of parents are like, I want my kids to experience tough things, but then at the heart level, it's like, oh, maybe not that hard.
Yeah, I think there was a big learning curve, I think, for us, and then also a balance you have to kind of strike between. I mean, when we first got here, we always, because it's so apparent, uh, some of the needs and the places that are underserved in the city. It was our kids were with us, right? When we'd be going out and serving in the community. And so people who don't know Jesus don't act like Jesus. And so they swear and they say things in front of your kids that you need to debrief after, and we had to have some safety rules. Every kid's different. So some of my kids were really great at staying right with us. Some of them weren't so good at following the rules and that kind of stuff because of the way that God created them to be. Our youngest loves people, and I think she was about 6 or 7. And we were doing some outreach right downtown in the city, and we were giving out coffee and sandwiches and that kind of stuff. And the rule was is they were supposed to be able to stay right with me at the table. And I turned and she wasn't there anymore. And and I look, your heart as a mom like drops right away because you're like, where is she? And I'm frantically looking for her. And I look and she's about, 150 meters away. And she's bringing over a man who's obviously very inebriated, and she's bringing him to us. And my first thought, honestly, was, I'm going to kill her when I get a hold of her. Like, she's in so much trouble, and she got to the table, and, I almost missed what God was doing, because she said, Mom, this is Joe. And I saw him and everybody was so busy and he didn't think that he could come over. And I told him that everybody's welcome here and that that he could have coffee and we could talk and pray for him because he has some things that he would like some prayer for, and then I was like, oh,
Melt your heart.
like, yes. We still had to have a talk when she got home, like about safety boundaries and that kind of stuff. But God does some really incredible things with your kids, I think, when you allow them to work with him in the brokenness.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you have to be open to that. I mean, we did get to debrief a lot, about things that people were going through and things that are broken and where we as God's people need to be serving. So, yeah.
So all of that was in the not confines, but in the reality of being a church planter's wife, serving those. Your church was engaging with those who are on the margins. You're now in a role with an organization called Send Relief, which is now a continuation of what you were doing alongside the church, but now on a bigger scale. So why don't you share with our listeners who are not familiar with what Send Relief does, and then I think it's 5 pillars of the ministry or 5 focus areas of the ministry.
Yeah, so Send Relief is a collaboration between the International Mission Board and the North American Mission Board of our denomination. And so Canadian National Baptist Convention. And so we actually, the 5 pillars that we focus on, there's 20 Send Relief centers across North America. We're the first one in Canada, our center here in Hamilton. And so we've been up and running for about a year and a half. And the 5 pillars that of ministry focus areas that we have are there's fighting human trafficking, strengthening communities, which really means any kind of poverty alleviation. And then there's fostering and adoption. And there is crisis response. And then the last one is caring for refugees. And that's the one that our center focuses on the most, just because of where we are in the city. And that's who is really around us a lot. And it's also who we are as churches. I think we, in the Greater Toronto Hamilton area, our churches, as you know from your role, we have a lot of diversity, and our planters, there's a lot of them that were born outside of North America. And so I think, that God has uniquely equipped us to be able to reach out to those that are going through some of the same things that many of our pastors went through themselves when they arrived here in Canada.
So share with us a little bit about the transition from, I'm going to say, like the average church planter's wife who's walking alongside her husband and all of the ups and the downs, and we got to do some ministry on the street. And, I would assume you were growing in your knowledge of what was going on in the city, now to the role with Send Relief, meeting the needs of refugees that are here in Canada. How has again, from like an average church planter's wife that's on the street now, how has your perspective been changed? What are you learning as you're directing this ministry and looking into the future?
Yeah, I think, how's it changed? I mean, when you meet people that have left everything behind in order to keep their children safe, there's things that we just take for granted as Canadians, good or bad, but I don't have to worry too much about people taking my children from me and having to pay a ransom in order to get them back. And so when you see too when they've come here, they've left everything behind. So they've left family behind. They've left, good businesses lots of times, good jobs. And then they have a family that's living in like one room, a whole family living in one room, without a lot of security, like locked doors or things like that. And also in places that, have bed bugs and aren't great for actually bringing up a family. I think your heart changes, whether you're, a pastor's wife or not. God created everybody, and those are our neighbors. Like literally, those are our neighbors. So, and I think when I hear statistics too, like Hamilton, not too long ago, did a red alert report, and it was about the outcomes of different neighborhoods, in different ways. And the life expectancy difference between my neighborhood where I live and the neighborhood right next door was 20 years. Those are your neighbors, right? And so we as the church have to be involved in that. I think Keller kind of says, like, to spread the kingdom of God, it's more than simply winning. It's more than simply winning people to Christ. It's also working in the healing of people, right? That we seek justice that we need to seek justice as the church. And so I think my heart has changed both in experience of what I've experienced of meeting people, and then also what I've learned, and God has just continued to grow in my heart and my own personal time with him, And so, it's been a neat journey. It's one of those things I say to people, looking back, for a long time, I wondered, because I was also an entrepreneur, and I often wondered like why God created me that way. Like I just had these thoughts in my brain and entrepreneurial things. And I thought, like, what is that about? And I sold my business in order to stay home with my kids, and which was awesome. Like I loved doing that, and we homeschooled and that kind of thing. But I often wondered why I was created that way. And what I'm doing now, like when I look back, I'm like, oh, so God has put all of these things together. He's grown my faith through church planting, I think, of just the ups and downs of that. And then also, yeah, just depending on him. There's so many needs here. So it's very easy to get overwhelmed. So we have to trust that God has a plan for all of it.
Mm-hmm. So what are some of the greatest economic challenges that you're witnessing in Hamilton? And even if you'd be willing to unpack a little bit about that Red Alert report related to life expectancy being 20 years lower in the neighborhood next to you, like what is behind some of that, but what are some of the greatest economic challenges that you're witnessing?
Yeah, I mean, that report was done before COVID. So I think they're going to try to update it now. But because I think what happened with COVID is a lot of the differences and disparities in the city actually just got wider. Last April, Hamilton declared a state of emergency for an opioid crisis, for mental health crisis in the city, and also for those that are unhoused in our city. So we just don't have the housing for people. And so it's not uncommon to see tent encampments around here. And they're in all parts of the city. It used to be that they were in some parts of the city, but not in other parts of the city. But they're in a lot of parks now in the city, and everyone is aware of it. And so I think the other pressure that happened last year is that when Toronto shelters closed their doors to refugees, people came to Hamilton, and so we saw a huge influx of people that were in need of protection, and were applying for protection in our country. And so the crisis really came home. And so we talk a lot here about like border crisis. A border crisis is no longer, we need to expand our definition of that, because it's no longer just happens at the border. The border crisis has moved to our cities, and the church has a role to play in that. God is sovereign, so he's bringing people here. And so what are we going to do about our new neighbors that he's brought us?
Let's jump into that a little bit related to how churches can engage, because I mean, already in our conversation, we've talked about those that are struggling with mental health that are living on the street. We've talked about encampments, and then we've also talked about refugees. And I'm assuming that not always are those always the same people. Those are sometimes different groups of people with different motives, with different backgrounds and histories. So how can churches, because I think this is probably the state of a lot of churches, having pastored one before, where you just look about and you're like, wow, this is overwhelming. I don't even know where to start. So how can churches help and not feel overwhelmed to the point of just not engaging at all?
You have to be willing to talk to people in your city. So start with where you are. What's happening where you are? So maybe you're not in Hamilton and not downtown, and so you don't, your church doesn't have all of the things that we're dealing with, right? But there'll be needs in your city that you might not know are there. And there'll be people that are already helping with them. So I would say you need to really take a look at your city, or where it is that your church is. You also need to take a look at your people. Like, who is it that God has brought you in your church? What are the strengths of some of the people? You might have somebody who is, an incredible teacher. You might discover that there is a big pocket of people who in your city whose English is their second language, like that they need to learn English. And you might have some, a few teachers and stuff in your church. How can you start an ESL that provides ongoing relational contact with people, that that you can actually be in their lives multiple times a week or a couple times a week, but ongoing, so you can learn about them.
Mm-hmm.
And those are ways that you can serve. You can, if you have a small church, you can join in with others who in your city is already doing some incredible things. Maybe there's another church that aligns with yours that you want to jump in with them. It doesn't have to be a program that we start ourselves. It can be something that we join with others in helping.
Friends, we'll get back to my interview with Kim McGibbon in just a moment. Prior to that, however, I want to let you know about the Send Relief Ministry Center. The Send Relief Toronto Ministry Center, based in Hamilton, often referred to as Toronto West or Canada's Brooklyn, focuses on addressing poverty, homelessness, food insecurity, and the needs of refugees and newcomers. With a vision inspired by Isaiah 61, 1-4, the center aims to bring good news to the poor, heal the brokenhearted, and proclaim liberty to captives. Emphasizing community strengthening and care for refugees, the center operates a Better Together initiative that connects newcomers with local churches for support and integration. Hamilton's diverse population, including a significant number of refugees, presents unique opportunities for the center to serve and reflect the community's diversity in its leadership and initiatives, including affordable housing projects and comprehensive support for assimilating into Canadian society. If you want to learn more about the Send Relief Ministry Center and Send Relief broadly, you can visit sendrelief.org. Once again, that is sendrelief.org. And now back to my interview with Kim McGibbon. And part of that, looking at your city, certainly, as you're saying, finding other churches that might be doing something, speaking to local government officials, finding the not-for-profits or government-supported assistance programs that are already there, finding ways for your volunteers, people in your church to volunteer and to serve in some of those things. I'm thinking about a local church here in the city that I live in, and they do a meal program, lunch and dinner, and they invite local churches to be part of providing the meal for each of those things. So I think at one point there was 15 to 20 different churches that were all getting behind this one church based upon where they were located to do their particular meal program. And I think there's obviously a lot of benefits to that. I think one of the other benefits is multiple churches coming together to meet a need, but also avoiding duplication. And also, there's a book I read years ago called When Helping Hurts. I don't know if you're familiar with that book, but I'd love for you to share a little bit. Again, it goes back to that benefit of if we're all doing these random things and we're not familiar with what each person and organization is doing, sometimes we can do more harm than actually good. So would you unpack that a little bit for us of thinking to the background of the book When Helping Hurts? What are your thoughts? And how have churches done more hurt than help in the past, and how can we transition forward?
Yeah, I think your comment about, not duplicating services is a great one, because I think if we join together, we can really help our cities and have a bigger impact for the kingdom, And I think the other part of and what Helping Hurts really talks about a lot is when the fall happened, we were separated from God. So there's that core separation, but there was also other ways that we separated from the fall. And so there's psychological, we lost our true selves, who God created us to be. We had conflict, there's social alienation, we had conflict with one another. And then also that there's physical needs, there's brokenness in physical brokenness in people, but also creation. And I think when we're serving people, and when multiple churches come together to serve people, there's the people that you're serving, but there's also the people that are watching how you serve. And sometimes, especially if they're not Christ followers, they don't recognize how you're serving that core need of the gospel, sharing with people the gospel. But they do recognize, because they feel it, they feel physical needs. right? And when they see you serving physical needs, I think that's a doorway for them to having further conversations with them about Christ. So I think there's some really great things that happen when churches come together. The unity alone, for people to see the unity, I think that that's something that we've struggled with sometimes in the past. And so that is a really great thing for our cities. And I think it's great for us, you know, to be, we've talked before about being more kingdom and so helping without hurting. It's a great book to start with, to read, because we often just think of the needs in the city, but there's assets in the city. Like there's things that are already going on. God is already working in places. And so if we can join him in that work, I think it goes a long way to furthering the kingdom.
I'd love for you, Kim, to share some stories. I mean, we've talked somewhat philosophically about the broad challenges and some ways that churches can get involved, but I think the power is in the stories of the people that you're working with. So would you share with us just a few stories of people that you're meeting and some of the very tangible ways that you're able to serve them?
The people that we're meeting, and I'll change their names because just for, safety and that kind of thing. But you and I were somewhere yesterday and I told a story about a woman named Edith. So I think my challenge to churches is that everybody can be involved. There's a woman named Edith who came from a church in the States. She was 85 years old. And when we first came to Hamilton, she knew she couldn't come here on a mission trip to physically help. And so she prayed the streets of Hamilton through Google Earth. Like this woman was so faithful and she prayed every single street. And so often we have felt those prayers. And I think the Send Relief Center is a direct result of some of those prayers, of praying for the brokenness that is in Hamilton. And so that I think is really incredible. It's just, to me, it's the backbone of our story, and I think that everyone can be involved in this. Often, people will say to me, "Oh, but like I wouldn't know what to say," or for people who are housebound that can't physically go and do things, there's ways to be a part of this mission. But some of the stories that we have of people here are people that have come from places where their kids have been, they don't speak the language. They've had great jobs when they were in their home country, and they've come here they've come here really because they can't keep their kids safe. And so to see them come to our center, to help them find some community, to help them find places that they can serve, is really an incredible thing. We have a family, it's actually the very first family that we started helping. And so they started attending. We really try hard to connect the people that we meet into local churches. And so they started attending a local church. They invited they had a family member and their family that also had to come because of what was happening back home. Because when they couldn't get to the first family, they actually went after other people in the family to try to get to the first family. So anyways, they weren't Christians. Her brother wasn't, and his family weren't Christians. They kept inviting them to church and sharing with them about what they were learning as they've been discipled. And so they actually accepted Christ and were baptized. And so now that first family, they actually hold a Spanish life group in their house once a week. And they've changed the church that they attend because they just keep inviting people. So that English church now has full Spanish translation. So on Sundays, and now has a Spanish life group. And, maybe one day we'll see that they have a Spanish pastor. And so maybe some weeks the English pastor will preach, and the people that speak Spanish will have translation. And maybe other weeks the Spanish pastor will preach, and then the English people will have translation. The other things are, we have a really great program that we've partnered with a company called Vero Skills. And so we teach people how to code. And so this program is really great because it's remote. We do have them come into the center once a month, and so that we can chat with them and have relationships, ongoing relationships, and talking to them about Christ. But they actually learn how to code, become software engineers. It takes about 6 to 9 months, depending on the person. Then they get a internship, and there's a 98% job placement rate. So the internship is paid. And because they can do this training remote, they can also have a job during the day, and they can do this kind of training at night. And there's 24-hour tutors, and Eben in our office does a great job of leading out in that. And we've have some incredible stories of, we have a single mom that's almost finished. And when she came here, she came with her husband, and he left her with the 4 kids here, and she didn't know what she was going to do. And so she's done this program. She's almost done, and she's pretty almost this close, so close to the internship program. But it's been incredible for us to be able to have conversations, because she's not of Christian faith. And so she's a Muslim background, and we've had some really, really great conversations with her about why. Like, she really has a hard time understanding why we would reach out to her and offer this to her and encourage her and her kids, even when we're of different religions. So she's starting to ask questions. It's easy when someone asks you a question like, why would you do this? Well, because Jesus has changed my whole entire life, and it includes this, and the way that he calls us to reach out to our neighbors. And so, yeah, I'm excited for the day that she continues to ask more questions, and it's just fun to see what God's doing in her heart.
Talk to us a little bit about, I know that there's oftentimes ministries that they'll give food or food items or grocery bags or food boxes out. You guys started a program that really kind of takes the next step with some of those boxes. Share with our listeners about that.
So we kind of have 2 programs, but we'll talk about the cooking program. We realized that when we were helping people find out about the food banks in our city, that it's often the food that is given is North American. And the people that we serve, none of them were North American. And so sometimes they had no idea what the food was that they were getting. And so it was just sitting on their shelves, being unused, because they didn't know how to cook it. They didn't know what to do with it. And so Eben, who works in our office, she came here to Canada as a newcomer. And so she told us about going and getting pancake mix. And they don't have pancake mix in her country of Namibia. And so she had no idea what to do with it. And so I think she told me she ended up donating it back to the food bank, because she was like, I don't know what this is, until one of the ladies at a church that she was attending saw the pancake mix in her cupboard and said, oh, do you like pancakes? And she said, I don't know what those are, and I don't know how to cook them. And so she showed her how to cook them, and it became like her kid's favorite meal. And so that was kind of what started our program of once a month talking to our families and finding out, like, what'd you get this month that you don't know what to do with it? And they'll send pictures and things, and then developing a menu for the night, and we all cook together and then eat together and then send them home. with the recipe and with a made meal that they can eat another night. So it's a great program, and it's a lot of fun. You learn a lot from about people, and it's a great program to have volunteers at. Everybody talking about their favorite foods growing up, and learning about those kinds of things. That helps break down walls.
Well, it breaks down walls, and it meets people where they are, and there's so much beauty of relationship that happens around food, and it addresses the reality that, man, again, that's another way that, okay, we're trying to help, but we're not necessarily listening to the person that we're trying to help, and having an opportunity for them to share what's actually going on, and their experience.
Yeah, one of the things that we've also learned is, I think as the church, we really are pretty good at welcoming. We want to be welcoming, right? That we can get our heads around. I think sometimes what we have trouble getting our heads around is being welcomed.
Mm.
And so our new neighbors, when they were back home, they would welcome people to their houses all the time. And we need to be willing to be welcomed into their house, and not try to say, oh, like, I'll bring food and I'll bring this, and because we feel bad. We don't want them spending their money or their resources in hosting us, but they need to host us.
Mm-hmm.
Like, think about it yourself. You want, if you've done that your whole life, how you really feel a part of a community is to actually be a part of the community, right? To be serving in a community, the relationship needs to be reciprocal.
Mm-hmm.
And I think those are the parts when I hear people talk about friendships that they've made. One of our volunteers, she's a senior, and she doesn't have any family here close by. Her boys one lives on the other side of the world, and one lives on the other side of Canada. And she is affectionately known by quite a few of our families as their Canadian grandma.
Mm.
And it's a beautiful thing to watch, God weave all those new friendships together.
I'm just thinking about pastors listening to this, and they're likely trying to think through, okay, what do I do next? So I get to know my city a little bit. I speak to some local people. How is Send Relief coming alongside local churches and pastors in discovering and figuring out ways of how to develop ministries of compassion and justice out of their churches?
I mean, we have a few different ways. So, like, right on the Send Relief website, we have courses that you can take that are video courses. We also have ministry guides there's a great one of how to start a ministry that actually has some surveys in it that we actually used when we were starting the Send Relief Center, and found them extremely helpful in getting to know your city. Sometimes people are a little bit nervous about doing surveys, but actually, when you go out into your city and talk to business owners or to people, I find most people, they want to talk about their city. And they want, and maybe it's because Hamilton, they can see the needs. They're just so evident. The number one thing that everyone always says whenever we've done these surveys is that housing is the biggest need in the city. But you find out about people. You find out what people think instead of just assuming. So we help with those things. But then too, if people want to call our office, we'll come to their church, or we can do like a video call or something and help them walk through finding their unique ability that God has placed them for in their city. Mm-hmm. So that's one of my favorite things to do, actually, to be honest. It's to help churches and help people find out what it is that God's calling them to do in their city, in order to be connected with their neighbors.
Kim, I think we could talk and hear stories for the next 3 hours. And certainly we've addressed the challenges that a refugee faces and immigrants to the country. But just as we close, how can we pray for you and the growth of the ministry of Send Relief, both in Hamilton and in Canada?
I think praying for us that we would continue to live out our vision of Isaiah 61, 1-4, and that we would continue to make sure that we are listening to the people that we serve, and that we talk about this a lot, is just serving out of the overflow, of our own relationships with Jesus, because you can get burned out. There's always a need. And often when we're trying to close at night, someone is coming asking for something. And so it is hard balancing between the needs in the city and then also having rest, and time for our families and all those kinds of things. Everything that church planters face.
Kim, hey, on behalf of everybody that is listening, I just want to say thank you for all that you're doing. And we will certainly be praying for you and this ministry going forward. Thank you. Well, friends, there's so much here in this conversation with Kim McGibbon that we could focus on and apply as our action step. The thing that I want to give focus and emphasis to, however, is simply this: prayer. I want to invite you to spend some time yourself and with those that you are serving alongside to a season of prayer to consider what is the thing that the Lord is calling you and inviting you into to serve and to give focus to. As I said, we're in this 2-part mini-series on ministry to the margins. And coming out of a conversation like this one, it's easy to get fired up and say, okay, I've got to go do something. And I love that passion. I love that energy. But it's also essential that that is also driven by personal conviction through prayer and listening to the Spirit of God and asking, what is the thing that you want us to give specific focus and attention to? If in the season of prayer you come to determine that doing ministry to those on the margins and helping with refugees is the thing that you're invited to do, the next step is to go and to find other organizations in your city that may be providing some of this help and support, and asking about ways that you can partner with them. Once again, practical action step: take some time to digest what you've heard in this episode and then begin praying about how God would use you and your church community to influence and have an impact and care for those that are oftentimes unseen and overlooked in our cities. Thanks again, friends, for listening to this episode and this conversation. You're now going to hear a clip from part 2 of our Little Sowers mini-series of ministry to First Nations people and my conversation with Andrew Lang.
Staying in your community is highly valued, right? Like not leaving. And sometimes it's seen by some of the elders or community members like as a oh, you think you're better than us leaving the community, or you're abandoning your family. And so there's like guilt even with leaving the north. So a lot of people stay. That's why there's a tendency to stay in home communities and not maybe take opportunities like going to higher education. Most communities only have grade schools, not high schools. So like even today, you still have to, if you're in most northern communities, I think Pikanchcombe has a high school, you're flying out to go to a high school. So you're leaving your home community, and that culture shock is difficult.